this afternoon. I now have the treat of welcoming to stage someone who truly embodies what it means to be a champion for consumer innovation. As general partner at VMG Partners, Wayne Wu brings not just capital, but deep strategic partnership to some of the most beloved and breakthrough brands on the market today. We're talking about Drunk Elephant, Kind, Quest, Spindrift, and many more. His decades of experience and razor-sharp insight and unwavering passion for founder-led growth companies will help propel these companies and help them reach incredible new heights. Based in San Francisco, Wayne thrives on working hand in hand with the next generation of bold, creative entrepreneurs. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Wayne Wu and his panel.
Money, it's a crime. Share it fairly, but don't take a slice of my pie.
Right, hold on. Here we go.
Money, so they say, is the root of all evil today. But if you ask for a rise, it's no surprise today.
Well, that was a kind introduction. So we were thinking about this slot. We're like, oh, interesting. We're like, this is gonna be a great slot right after lunch. But then I walked outside and I realized like, this is gonna be a problem. Like, how are we gonna get all these people to come back in? We were talking to ourselves in the green room. We're like, this is gonna basically be the same conversation just amongst ourselves. So thank you for leaving that wonderful weather outside and joining us. I think we have a really exciting panel here with three friends from the industry. So I'm going to start off here to my left. We have Tom Allison. He leads new ventures at Live Nation, the world's leading entertainment company. So prior to Live Nation, that's when Tom and I first met. He was over at ABI in their ZX Ventures division, where he led their investments and strategy in both CPG and technology. He had joined there from McKinsey, where he was a consultant in similar categories. And then prior to that, which is very special, he served in the military as a ground force commander in the special ops unit. I've learned not to mess with him because of that. You look at that serious look, you don't want to mess with this guy over here. And then he got his MBA from Wharton. So fun fact of Tom from the Special Operations Unit, he was actually an art major in college. One of the things I thought about when he shared his profile with me, I'm like, I know we've all been there, where you're sitting in a meeting and you just start doodling. And so as a very accomplished business professional here in Tom, I was thinking, he must be the greatest doodler. So I want to ask you a very serious question here. And what is your go-to, what do you doodle in your notebook? Because when I'm on Zooms with him, he's never paying attention to what I'm saying, so he's clearly doing something else.
Yeah, probably not what I expected to kick off the panel with, but honestly, I would say that I was an art major in college, but the military actually stripped a lot of the creativity out of me. So now I just take like copious notes.
Wow, so he doesn't doodle. So maybe with my lack of art skills, I'm still doodling. But next, want to introduce Nikki Boyers. She is Vice President of Private Brands, 7 Ventures, and Emerging Brands at 7-Eleven. She strategically drives brand innovation and market evolution. So she's going to talk about what that means shortly. And she spearheads the development of innovative private brand strategies, cultivates emerging brands to help accelerate company growth, and also manages key strategic partnerships. Her collaborative approach with a diverse network enables the successful launch of brands in the retail landscape. Over 20 years of retail and leadership. Wow, he must have that's impressive. And but most importantly, her fun fact, she loves roller coasters.
I know, it's super random.
What is your favorite roller coaster of all time?
Okay, it's the Magnum from Cedar Point. So any of you ridden
Where
on
is that?
Ohio.
Okay.
Sandusky, Ohio. And I'm going to nerd out for a second. The Magnum was opened at the very late 80s, early 90s, and it was the original hypercoaster. So it was the first hypercoaster.
What does that mean?
Tallest, it is like 20th. But it's like what we all do, right? It was the innovator of its time, and it's still standing today. And there's lots of fast. There's a roller coaster now that I think is 240 miles per hour in Abu Dhabi.
That scares the
Yeah.
crap out of me.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I don't have a stomach for that. But very, very impressive, Nikki. And then third, but certainly not least, my long-time buddy Ryan Lewandon. He gave me a very professional bio. We're not going to go with any of it. So I truly think Ryan is truly a lawyer extraordinary. There's probably not an attorney in this space that has worked on more beverage transactions than Ryan. This was probably too modest, so I'm going to talk him up a little bit more. But he and I, our careers basically mirrored each other. We met back in 2008, soon after he had graduated law school, and I had just started at VMG, our first fund in 2008, and we met on Kind, where VMG was making our investment in Kind, and Ryan and his partner Nick Giannuzzi were our partners in that. And the genesis was really through Vitamin Water. We were reflecting in the green room there. Yep. So if anyone wants to talk to someone who's been through it all in terms of seeing beverage deals, Ryan's your guy there. So welcome.
Thanks, Wayne.
Fun fact for him. So somehow he started his CPG career while running a bar in New Orleans during college. Can you imagine the shenanigans that this guy must have been a part of running a bar in New Orleans? So tell me, what does that mean?
I mean, running a bar in New Orleans is where I first gotten in my head that like CPG and especially insurgent brands could be something. I think, I had to go in on Wednesdays during the day and like do orders, and I just started to see how people were ordering, less Miller Lights over time and more Dixies or Abitas or local things. And then people would hit me up with some like local spirit that they created and want me to sell there, and I'd be like, yeah, no, get out of here, no way. But then people would be asking for it, right? And it's like where it really started to see in my head where, hey, look, people's tastes are fragmenting. People don't necessarily want to consume, what's, the same thing that everybody else is. They don't want to consume what's, the thing that's made by a big corporation. They want to sort of have something that they identify a little more closely with. And, it was at that bar in New Orleans that I started to see it. And then, through law school, working and interning, I got the opportunity to sort of lobby myself onto the Vitamin Water account and work on that pretty early, and then really started to see how CPG and especially insurgent brands were becoming this like great ecosystem where somebody could start a brand, sell it to a big acquirer, and then sort of continue out in the ecosystem.
Well, perfect, Ryan. Well, that's a perfect segue to our first question, because Ryan has been in the beverage game for so long and seen so many deals. How would you characterize beverage deals today versus your earlier days in the industry?
Yeah. Look, I'd say, today versus the last 5 years, I'd say beverage deals right now, like the last 3-4 months, are happening sort of much easier, right? I don't think, there's been a tougher time to be a CPG entrepreneur than the last 5 years, right? The COVID period. I think probably, at least since 2007 and the financial crisis. Capital has been difficult, supply chain issues, people dealing with inflation. In addition to that, there was sort of this shift of, what a beverage was supposed to do. From, the early 2000s where sort of the ethos was, double every year, grow the brand at all costs, don't worry about the business, right? The underlying business as much, to, something different where it's, a hybrid approach where, now the companies that are doing well have to be a good business or have to look like they can grow into a good business as well as being a brand. And that all kind of shifted, from 2019 to 2020 to 2021. And, a lot of companies that had sort of been growing top line only had to sort of pivot and reassess and, dig back into their fundamentals and, grow a good contribution margin where that wasn't something we were focusing on. So, today I think there's alignment in the market. You want to grow, but you need to sort of worry about the bottom line. You need to grow. You need to have profitability. It has to be sort of closer to the top of mind. So there's alignment. I do think like a lot of the market government regulation shifts that are sort of out there favor insurgent brands. Like a lot of the Make America Healthy Again. Whatever you think about it, I think that favors insurgent brands. It's taking away a lot of the things that bigger companies had used to sort of reduce price, like the artificial dyes, and it's sort of favoring things that these insurgent brands have been doing by their own nature all along. I think tariffs in the short term probably, favor people with a more nimble supply chain. If you can switch your sourcing from a high tariff country to a lower tariff country fairly easily, that's something that's going to allow you to be more nimble in the short run. And then, the recent acquisitions, Ghost, which you were a big part of, and Alani Nu, and then Poppi in the marketplace. That's brought a lot of the capital, that's been sitting in the sidelines for the past 5 years back into the marketplace. And, I would say through our firm, we've closed more, 20, 30, $50 million rounds of financing, Q1 of this year than we did probably all of 2023.
Anything in corporate venturing?
Yes. And like I will say about corporate venturing, saying things have gotten easier the past 5 years. One thing that's gotten a bit harder is just how many really strong players are in this industry, whether, from all sides, like whether it's from legal side, the investment side, whatnot. And you look at sort of the companies that are getting funded, and all of them have an edge, right? They've got, the advice of a Wayne Wu, behind them. They've got, a celebrity attached. They've got some competitive edge. And, it is a lot of these corporate venture opportunities that are sort of adding to that. I think it's really tough if you're just starting a brand these days to kind of come out as like an outsider in the industry and grow and scale a company without really any experience or good advice around you. So, these corporate venture opportunities are sort of becoming, not table stakes, but they're becoming much more important to sort of changing the trajectory of some of these companies.
Makes sense. Well, speaking of corporate venturing, we got two of the best here, like I mentioned when we kicked it off here. So first, I'll start with you, Nikki. Tell us a little bit more about 7-Eleven. How do you think about, as I look back at corporate venturing, I think one of the more consistent players I've seen over my time in the career has been the 7-Eleven program. So tell us a little bit more about that and what's a fit.
Great. Okay, so 7-Eleven is actually almost 100 years old. So that's pretty cool. In 2027, we'll be 100 years old. And the way that we sustained over almost a century is thinking about our customer first. And with that, they expect innovation. And so about a decade ago, we stood up the corporate venture arm at 7-Eleven. And the intent behind that was to invest in innovative startups that we could help grow and that aligned with our mission of convenience. And so there's about 3 different segments that we look to invest in. One is food and beverage, the other is technology, and the third is customer experiences, and we're starting to look at sustainability. And so I think what's critically important is that we align on the same mission, right? Convenience, and we have the ability to scale our businesses together.
And how do you think about that relative to you also lead the private brand initiative at 7-Eleven. How do you think about the role of established brands, entrepreneurial brands, and private brands?
It's a really great question. So I think they all live harmoniously. And there's a purpose and mission for each of those. I think the first, when we talk about just national brands, there is so much heritage and history and category leadership behind a lot of the national brands, critically important to our business. Private brands, our mission is to provide a value to our customer with high quality products, and that's becoming really important to the customer, especially in this environment. And emerging brands are identifying white space that doesn't exist and customer needs that are out there that aren't being served. And so they all sit harmoniously for our customers to come and really get their needs satisfied.
That's helpful. And so before we kick it over to Tom and on the Live Nation side, a question that comes to my mind is because this is such an established program, what's a fit today? I think we can skip the technology piece of it because of the audience. What's a fit today from a beverage brand perspective, and how has that changed over the years?
So our entire arm has changed pretty drastically over the last decade. I mean, what started out as a few really passionate individuals doing this on the side of their desk, we now have a dedicated team. And that team is discovering new brands, testing new brands, investing and helping scale new brands. And I think there's 3 critical components. It should be differentiated product, differentiated than what we have, and it has to add incrementality to the entire store, whether that's incrementality of a new category or incrementality into an existing category that's not servicing the needs, and then ultimately the ability to scale.
Mix. And how much has that changed, really? Like, is there any notable learning you would say for the program that was an unlock?
I can't think of anything that's significantly different other than I think we're just more sophisticated than we were 10 years ago. And so the power that we have behind the scale of the brands that we're able to invest and nurture is just broader and larger.
Makes sense. Before Tom dives into the Live Nation program, I thought it was just kind of interesting the fact that you're both sharing a couch here. It's almost like symbolic of a partnership that 7-Eleven and Live Nation have actually recently entered into. You want to share a little bit about that before we dive into the Live Nation program?
It's pretty coincidental because I didn't even work on the deal. I don't think Nikki did either. But yesterday, I think it was announced the first ever naming rights deal in the United States for one of our festivals, and it's 7-Eleven is going to be the title sponsor of When We Were Young, which is our iconic Las Vegas pop punk emo festival, which sells out every year. It's a super cool event, and then 2 other festivals as well. But I think the coolest part of it is, what I was excited about is that the Slurpee is actually going to be served at all of those events, which I know fans are going to love.
Can you mix it with beatbox?
I'm sure that people will do it. I guarantee it will be done.
That sounds amazing. Well, tell us a little bit more about the Live Nation program.
Yeah, sure. So, I think in the context of beverage, the way to think about Live Nation is a platform to connect brands with our fans. We have 50,000 events a year, 150 million fans a year that come to our shows. So it's just it's an awesome place to do kind of liquid to lip sampling and drive that kind of brand introduction and impact. And I think historically there have been a lot of brands that have been built, leveraging our platform. Think brands like Red Bull, Tito's, even Beatbox that you mentioned. We have a deep partnership with them. We can't invest in alcohol, but on the non-alc side, we kind of ask the question, can we lean into this value creation in a bigger way to help our fans get more, cooler, more relevant brands, emerging brands that fit with live music culture, brands that have a little bit of an edge. Can we do that and structure partnerships in a little bit of a different way where there's some equity involved? And probably the best example to date is Liquid Death. Mike's going to be talking later today, so I won't steal all the thunder, but we were able to help them. 4 years ago we got involved and take them from a fairly niche kind of audience to a much bigger, audience with new segments of fans.
No, that makes sense. And similar question to, has the program evolved over time based on any particular learnings?
I don't know that it's evolved. I mean, there was a program before my time. I've only been there for 4 years. I think one big learning that I've had, and it probably even draws back to some of my previous experiences, like making sure you kind of structure a commercial deal alongside the investment so that it holds everyone accountable and like what you're signing up for, and there's clear deliverables in the deal. So I think like crystallizing that as something that's a best practice is, I'd say, one learning.
That's great. So building upon that, I was like, how should a brand or others in the audience think about how do the general economics work? Because you mentioned there's a commercial deal, there's an equity investment. How do they think about that at more of a tactical level of the breakdown of like what's a fit and how they should think about it from a structure standpoint?
Right. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I think
Ryan will.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he's been on the other side of a bunch of our deals.
You're waiving attorney-client privilege, right?
He can share. The one thing I'd say is we don't ask for anything for free. I think a lot of big companies, even celebrities, they'll ask for advisor shares or stuff like this. We structure a commercial deal alongside the investment that has like concrete deliverables against it, right? So it could be a sponsorship deal that includes X number of venues, Y number of festivals, a digital media fund, other experiential assets that are rolled into it. That's a 3 to 5 year deal where we're delivering those commitments over that time period, and that sits alongside the equity investment, right? And the kind of sponsorship marketing package, we're compensated in equity, cash, some combination of the above. But it's structured. I think the important thing is it's structured at the same time where we do the investment, right? So in a lot of cases I've seen you kind of scramble to get a deal done, write a check, and then you figure out the integration later. We always try to do it at the same time, so then you're ready to run once the deal is done.
And are you generally leading deals, or do you co-invest with other funds? How do you think about that?
We're usually leading, because we come in and we're pretty active. We take a meaningful position in the company. In some cases, we have other investors coming in alongside of us, but usually we're leading the rounds.
Great. Well, Nikki, compare and contrast, how should folks think about the 7-Eleven program's economics?
So fundamentally, before we get to leading rounds, fundamentally it's very similar to what we just talked about. But I would say that all of our deals are unique, and I know that sounds really cliche, but they're really set up for the strategic intent of the founder and the brand. And so, it can be a combination or one or the other of cash investment and then also leveraging our resource as an operating partner. And that, helping navigate the industry, navigating 7-Eleven. We are definitely different, and we are more of a co-investor or a follower versus a lead investor.
Makes sense. And how do you think about for a brand thinking about, well, because you have a majority of the brands going to 7-Eleven, I would assume are not part of the investment program. How does a brand think about whether to bring you onto the cap table or just a general or the normal route to market?
So any brand can sell to their neighborhood 7-Eleven and start a test and kind of see what the market traction is. Any brand can reach out to one of our category teams and connect with them, and that happens. We do find that there is a higher success rate when the brand engages the emerging brands team. And I think because of a couple reasons. First, 7-Eleven is really complex. And so having a champion to help navigate that, and you get one first impression. So, being able to have somebody to consult with on that first impression, there's been a lot of brands that we've consulted and we've asked a lot of questions and they weren't ready to launch at 7-Eleven and weren't ready to be in the C-store space. And that's allowed them to go back and rethink and work on the proposition to then be successful. So we see a higher success rate. I think the other thing, and this kind of answers your earlier question on what's different from over the last 10 years, is we're a pretty sophisticated machine within 7-Eleven and with the category teams and the marketing teams. So there's a lot of connectivity, I would say, influence to be able to really bring a brand to life inside our stores. And I think that's different than it was potentially 10 years ago. And so I think, again, any brand, we have, one of our guiding principles is entrepreneurial spirit. So any brand can go into a 7-Eleven and sell to a franchisee. It could become more difficult to scale, but bigger picture, we just definitely see with that high touch, white glove relationship with the emerging brands team, a higher success rate.
And do you typically go into that with, is there some different performance threshold, or is it more of there's just a deeper partnership?
So I think, say that differently.
So a typical commercial relationship with 7-Eleven, I assume there's a certain expectation on velocity and turns. Is there some other threshold that is provided for the investment brands, or it's just more just generally, you'll help them navigate the system?
It's that advocate, and it's really having alignment across the organization. So when we have an investment brand, there typically is more alignment across the organization. And I think Sean earlier today from Target talked a lot about creating thresholds and milestones and hurdles, because a new emerging brand is going to do a totally different velocity number than a brand that's been there for 10 years. And the expectations can and should be different, but there has to be a glide path and hurdles that the emerging brand hits to continue in, let's say, the vault doors. That's what we're talking about today, which is really high VPO. And so I think there is a lot more transparency around that with the brand, and then there's a lot more, I would say, internal company sweat to ensure that that brand has the best chance at success.
Makes sense. But pivoting back to Tom, so Tom, as I mentioned, in your bio, you were at ABI ZX Ventures before. How would you compare and contrast the programs that you've been a part of?
Yeah, so very different companies, obviously different industries, different capabilities, some similarities, right? Also different objectives around control and other things like that. I think the biggest distinction is, the value that we bring to a brand, right, is at Live Nation is primarily marketing value, right? Like obviously there is some distribution involved, but it's a marketing package that we can, that's our value driver. At ABI it was distribution, right? So we would kind of fight to figure out, what is the right structure of a distribution deal to make sure that all the incentives are aligned. When we were there, it was super hard to figure out. I think we got to a point, on Ghost actually, which, you were involved in and Ryan mentioned, where, it's kind of a best-in-class deal where we structured a distribution deal alongside the investment that involved, different milestones that unlocked additional equity, and it really aligned incentives well, right? But the bottom line is it was distribution that we were bringing as a value driver. At Live Nation, it's really marketing. Otherwise, kind of everything else is similar. I don't think that we necessarily want to own these brands, like we did at ABI. So in that case, there were call options and other stuff like that involved. But I think in both cases, the kind of best practice of structuring that commercial deal alongside the investment, that was something that we did in all the deals that worked. There were a lot of deals that didn't work, but that was something that did work.
And something that just popped in my head that would apply to your time at ABI, and you mentioned this as well from a 7-Eleven perspective, is both 7-Eleven and ABI, you have a dynamic where there's the corporate entity, and then you have basically independent entities, and on one hand, on ABI, independent distributors that own the ABI distributors, and you have independent franchisees on this. How do you think about navigating that dynamic of what does corporate want from a standpoint of your invested programs, and what do the individual owners of these, franchisees, if you will, want? maybe whoever wants to jump in.
I mean, go ahead.
Please.
I think, again, like I always go back to contracts, and I don't mean to be like harping on contracts, because that's probably something that Ryan loves, because it's, you know, but like I think it really, like that's the way to unlock and align incentives. You know, like with Ghost, we had a master distribution agreement, which helped align the independent wholesalers, you know, based on certain incentives and objectives. You know, when we didn't do that in other deals, we didn't get them aligned, because it's super hard. You know, there's hundreds of these independent entities, and it's really hard to wrangle anyone or kind of incentivize anyone, you know, when you don't have some kind of a contract in place.
Nikki, you want to add to that? Or?
I think it really comes down to if there is a customer, an unmet customer need, and there is a solution from an emerging brand that services that need, the influencing of the franchisees, we're about 55% franchise, 45% corporate, influencing the franchisees becomes very simplistic, right? And if the price pack architecture is where it needs to be, there's a distribution model that they can count on, it's pretty simple. Getting there is a really big heavy lift, and that's why our team works as a partner, an operating partner, to help the brands get there and scale to be able to deliver on that. But fundamentally, if it's serving the customer needs, we see a lot of success in influencing those franchisees.
Well, last question on corporate venturing, kicking back to Ryan. So you have a beverage client comes up to you, they're considering a corporate venture investment, not necessarily from the two of them, but just broadly speaking. What are the typical things that come to mind that you're asking them and encouraging them to think about?
Yeah, so when anybody's looking at a corporate venture, investment, deal, whatnot, I think the most important thing is to sort of get a real, true alignment with the other party. And both of you touched on this a little bit, and by the way, I think both 7-Eleven and Live Nation do a very good job with this in their deals, which is kind of like being very open, direct, and honest about, you know, why they're doing it. Are they coming in as an investor? Are they a potential acquirer? You know, is this sort of a way to get sort of a deep market research into an area they want to go into? And sort of, you know, how are they going to act on a go-forward basis, right? Is this a one-time investment? Are they a follow-on, you know, person? Setting those expectations is so important in terms of creating the right deal, in terms of creating the right amount of parity amongst the parties. And, you know, I've seen companies do corporate venture deals with basically everybody, and the times whenever they've gone, you know, not great, or when the expectations going into it just haven't necessarily been sort of discussed all the way through, and one party comes in thinking, hey, this is, you know, maybe my company's going to sell to this person, and, you know, the other side is like, you know, hey, this is a deep marketing research type of thing, right? And then when the deal structure is not aligned to create the right, you know, checks and balances amongst the parties, that's when things really kind of fall flat, you know. Look, I think the Liquid Death in Live Nation is probably like one of the best examples of it working right, where you find a commercial deal that makes sense, and then, you know, obviously the parties sort of are in sync from there. But yeah, I think it's, hey, you got to structure the right deal. You got to understand why the other party's at the table, and, you know, what they're really bringing and what their long-term intention is, and sort of create the right architecture around that to make sure that it's harmonious in the long term.
So broader than even just corporate venturing specifically, Ryan, like what do you know, you mentioned earlier, you already kind of shared a bit about the profile of company that you're seeing successfully raise capital today. But what are you seeing in terms of like specific, what I find usually helpful in these panels is like, sometimes a pretty tactical level. Like what are you seeing trending on like actual terms? What are you seeing either corporate venture groups or investors? What's like the terms du jour?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm finding that today companies are much more fundamentally sound than they were 2018 and before. And, you know, I think that's one reason why I think there's a lot more parity in the market, right? I'm seeing a lot more balanced terms. I don't know that the multiples are necessarily, they're a little bit more balanced, and because of that, I think, like in terms of investments, board seats, I'm seeing minority investors, take a minority of the board. I'm seeing founders retain, board control or board majority, or at least a significant representation, if there's a lot of investors on the board after multiple rounds of financing. Founder vesting, I'm seeing that almost never these days. The kind of post-COVID days.
What do you mean by that?
Founders being asked to sort of vest their equity in, starting from not from inception, but from a Series A or a Series B. You were seeing that kind of like in 2017, 2018. You're not seeing it now. Stuff like anti-dilution protection and some of the stuff that's in the NVCA, you pretty much see as table stakes. But when it comes down to minority protections, I'm seeing a balance. I'm seeing opportunities for companies to raise additional capital or even sell under certain circumstances without a specific investor approval or block on that. And I am seeing like a good amount of the decision-making process sort of shift from shareholder to board member, right? Or subject to fiduciary duties.
I'm going to pause you here.
Yeah.
We're down to the last 2 minutes. Each 30 seconds, what advice do you each have for an emerging brand entrepreneur, beverage entrepreneur here? 30 seconds.
Great. I'll go first.
You're on the clock. You're down to 25.
Yeah. Look, I think it's surround yourself with great people. There's a lot of advice out there in the market. There's a lot of great people adding services in the market. Put those people around you. Avail yourself of, people that have made the mistakes before you. Grow a good fundamental business. Grow a brand that's a great business. And, hopefully put some good value-added people, partners around you, like the folks up here.
Nikki?
I would say stay very close to the customer needs and what the customer wants, and show momentum. And I would say one of the most important things that I've seen is continuous improvement is critical. From inception to when you're at large scale, that constant continuous improvement will continue to keep you ahead and set you apart. And so I would stay focused on that.
Well said. Tom, close us out.
I think it's develop a fan base, right? Like I think there's a clear distinction between brands that have like consumers and brands that have real fans. And I think if you can like evolve from having consumers to fans, it's a huge unlock in terms of marketing efficiency and in terms of a lot of things. That's something that Liquid Death has done really effectively, and it's been really interesting to watch how they've done it. But I think in an age when like efficiency and marketing efficiency is more important than ever, it's like that's the key unlock.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this panel. I'm going to introduce the next segment here. But after I introduce, will everybody do me a really big favor? I don't know if it's going to work because the lights are shining this way. All of us are going to stand up here, and I'm going to take a selfie with all of you behind me. Will everybody put up their hands in a minute, okay? And I'm going to introduce the next person first, and then will everybody indulge me in this? So the next segment is a gentleman named Daniel Scharf. I really love this guy because I personally am super passionate about this industry. That's why I wear these silly pants. And I think what he really epitomizes is the community aspect of this industry, of really supporting startup entrepreneurs and founders and innovation in the industry, and really helping them find visibility. And so this next segment is super exciting, where it's a lightning round pitches. I hope you guys bring the same level of enthusiasm in that, because I think there's so many entrepreneurs that want the audience with you, and I think one in particular is a kid in high school that's coming up. So I hope you show him a lot of love coming up. So with that being said, the next segment is Startup CPG with Daniel Scharf. And then here we go. Will everybody indulge me in this part here? Come on, let's get into this. Josh Wan, why don't you get over here?
Turn the lights down.
Let's see if this works. Everybody put your hands up.
Yeah.
Josh, you in here? Here we go. Let's go. Thank you. All right, next segment, Daniel Scharf. Thank you, everybody.